Looking at how other artists draw is very helpful when you want to determine your own preferences in art and learn about new ways to stylize different elements. Because of this, analyzing other artists' work you admire and getting inspired by it can lead to a lot of improvement and development in your art. Because of all these reasons, I decided to analyze 7 artists' styles and draw my OC in all of them. In last week's video, I talked in depth about one of the 7 styles I drew my OC in. In today's video, I'll talk about the remaining 6 artists, but in a shorter form, since I wanted to try out doing both a video talking in depth about one artist similar to Topo, but also a video focused on this overall project similar to videos I've done in the past, but also Duchess Celestia, ABD Illustrates, and many other artists. So I decided to make these 2 kinds of videos. For now, I mention how I prepared for this project. Before even gathering references, I first wanted to establish my goal. I've seen many artist analysis videos on YouTube recently, which I liked a lot, and because of this I was aware that you could study artists in many different ways. At the time I was feeling a bit bored with my own way of drawing. I wanted to see if I enjoyed applying what I saw in the other artists' art in my own process. Because of this I didn't want to draw using the exact same step-by-step process and layers the other artists used. Instead I just wanted to focus on making my art look similar visually. I chose 7 artists and I picked out some art of them to use as references. First, I analyzed those references by taking notes on the different features, and later on I looked at them while drawing in the art style. Also, the references I used were all from the time I drew this. Over time, the artist's styles will also develop and change. I also wanted to determine the poses I would draw my OC in beforehand and chose 7 poses from my daily drawings. I wanted them to align nicely together and be rather straightforward with a front-on perspective. That's it for all the preparation. Now I'll move on to talking about each artist. We start with Ming ZZ on Instagram. I'll call them Moomin. This artist draws handsome anime boys. I like the atmosphere the art has through the dreamscape-like backgrounds and the bright colors. Next I mentioned some of my notes from my analysis, but I won't mention everything since that would make this video maybe 6 times as long. But I'm putting up all the notes I made on screen alongside my time-lapse. Moomin uses very thin, rather few clear sharp lines that are mostly black. The necks are pretty white, making the characters look more masculine and older. The nose tends to be a bit reddish and there is a shadow on the lips, and some characters have moles. The eye shape is often rather square. The iris has a dark shadow below the eyelash and around the iris outline. It has the most saturation around the middle, and for the lower brightest part there is a hue shift. The eye highlight is also placed there at the bottom of the eye. The hair is drawn with rather messy lines. Layered shading separates parts of the hair and hair strands that are overlapping. Moomin uses a lot of white and some black along with cool pastel colors which are mostly blue, purple or pink. The skin tends to be pinkish. The shading is made up of around 3 to 4 shades, mostly including a white lighting and 2 to 3 levels of shadows which are also blended often. This artist likes to add small accessories, mostly for the hair or clothing, using a border effect probably. In the background they draw elements like flowers, wings, plants, use graphic elements, or paint a simple scene. It overall creates a dreamy atmosphere. These elements are mostly out of focus and blurred. Small white particles as well as a grain filter are also added as finishing touches. The process for the shading I would use while drawing in Moomin style was made up of these steps. 1. Block in the colors. 2. Add in the shadows, using 1 to 2 colors, blurring them sometimes. 3. Add in the lighting. And 4. Add in blue spots and more detail. The biggest challenge while drawing this was doing the hair. I found a time-lapse video on Instagram which helped me with drawing it, but since I didn't want to just use the same steps as the artist because I wanted to apply what I saw in my own workflow, I didn't know how to best approach this and get a look similar to the artist. The solution to this was to break down the hair into areas that were in light or shadow or had some color variation in it and replicate what I saw in my references. I also noticed that I probably used a lot more brush strokes while shading than the artist uses. Here is what I would want to be inspired for my own style. For the backgrounds I really like the dreamy vibe, how it has some graphic elements but also regular elements like the windows or plants, but it all looks like it's in this heavenly or otherworldly realm. I like the added particles and dynamic elements as well. With the colors, I like the pink tone of skin with the blue tone of the other colors as well as the added blue overlay parts. I also like how the dreamy shading of the clothes looks, but I'm not sure if I would want to do it that way as well since it takes me pretty long, which is probably because I don't have much experience with shading in this way yet. And finally, what turned out differently from the artist to me would be 1. My rendering, shading and the background doesn't have as much detail and contrast as Moomin's illustrations. 2. My lines are thicker and more sharp, they're not as clean and flowy. And 3. The eyes also are a bit too high up on the face. Now moving on to the second artist, Niiko Jinny on Instagram. I refer to her with Jinny. This artist draws a lot of Genshin Impact fan art. Often it is AU related, for example a band AU. What stands out to me is the warm atmosphere in her art as well as the storytelling. I like the ideas behind illustrations a lot. The lines she draws are dark brown and pretty thin mostly. The characters have rather thin and cute body proportions, and the face shape is rounded with a pointy chin, except for older characters like Hatham. The eyebrows are rather thick and small. The eyes are drawn as almond shape with a thicker upper eyelash, while the lower one isn't always fully outlined. Jinny adds small lashes sometimes as well. Something unique is that the pupils are white and that a small highlight is above the top eyelash. The hair is drawn with clear lines and flowy shapes, while the shading is rather simple with cell shading with various highlight shapes most of the time. Jinny's art has a warmer color palette with a orangey or peachy and pinkish undertone. Cell shading is used and the darkest shadow is right under the neck most of the time. The soft, warm feeling of Jinny's art is enhanced by the overlay layers she uses, and the backgrounds are made up of gradients, textures, and graphic patterns or painted scenes. When I was drawing in her style, I struggled with the face symmetry as well as the head size. I also had some difficulties with getting a nice pink tone that would work with the warmer color palette. The backgrounds are what I would want to implement in a similar way in my art as well, and I also like the art content-wise. The many Genshin AUs and fanarts she's drawn are very inspiring to me. And what turned out differently from the artist to me would be 1. The face to hair ratio in my illustration is different from hers. The hair should be bigger and have more volume. 2. Once again, my lines are sharper and in this case also too thick, especially for the facial features. 3. The black tone I used is too cold or bluish probably. Now moving on to the third artist, mixsamixsa, who I refer to as Misa. This artist draws a lot of ensemble stars but also Genshin Impact fan art with a very cute kawaii aesthetic. The many decorations as well as the pinkish colors are very unique and I personally like this whole aesthetic a lot. The art looks like it could belong in a kawaii cafe with the many sweets in there. All the other details are very creative. Misa draws using pink lines mostly. Some of them are colored differently as well and they look soft and fluffy. The bodies are drawn with rather thin proportions and faces are pretty long with a rounded shape and a pointy chin, while the eyebrows are thin and rather long. A thicker curved upper line and a straight thin lower line is used to portray the eye outline. Some very small eyelashes are added to the lower line as well. What stands out about the iris is its shape as well as heart shapes used for the lower lighter part as well as the eye highlight. The same goes for the hair, it also has a heart-shaped highlight and is shaded with blended painterly strokes. As I mentioned before, Misa uses a lot of pink colors. Her art is also very pastel-y and bright. The shadows all have a rather soft edge and yellowish light is sometimes painted in as well. The many accessoires including cakes, plushies, sparkles, stars and decorative borders make this artist's art look very cute. These accessoires are also drawn with a lot of details. Then the clothes fit to the whole kawaii aesthetic as well. They often have frills, bows, ribbons and heart-shaped elements. As I was drawing my OC in this style, I noticed how sharp the edges of my brush were and I manually erased some ends to get a softer look for the line art. Still, this was the biggest challenge, getting my lines to look more soft and fluffy. I also tried out other brushes and using less pressure while drawing. I added in ruffles to my OC's outfit and struggled with drawing them a bit. After looking at Misa's art again, this was easier. Then I added in lots of other accessoires and decorations. If I were to include a lot of hard patterns in my art like her, I would make myself a stamp brush, so I would be able to quickly add them in. Drawing all the elements like bows and sweets was fun, so I want to also add stickers and elements fitting to a dreamy aesthetic into my art as well. I also really want to figure out how I can make my brush strokes look softer. This is also something that turned out differently from Misa's art to me. 1. My lines still look more stiff and harsh, and 2. The hair also doesn't have enough volume for this drawing. Now moving on to the fourth artists, Kai115, I refer to them as Kai. This artist draws anime boys. The illustrations can be inspired by different themes like Nintendo, Japanese or sparkles. I like how their art looks dynamic and atmospheric with the added elements. Kai draws using thin brown line art with a bit more realistic body proportions and a rounded face shape and chin. A light or shadow is placed on the nose which draws some attention to the face. The eyes tend to be completely outlined and have a almond-like rounded shape. There often is a small highlight or sticker placed below one eye. The iris is very colorful with several reflected lights. A star-shaped highlight is placed above the pupil as well as 2 smaller highlights at the left and right lower part of the iris. Compared to the other artists I'm mentioning in this video, in Kai's art the hair doesn't have as much volume. It is drawn with a focus on the overall silhouette shape and many inner hair strands are indicated through shading rather than line art. A lot of black and white is used in these illustrations, along with rather desaturated and muted colors. Shading is rather painterly and often a white glade is added. This artist adds different elements to the background. Often it includes graphic elements or textures like halftones. Then smaller particles are added as well as outline patterns a few times. I really like the way this artist draws hands, but trying to replicate this was pretty difficult to me. At first I drew the hand too thin and I had to make sure the shading of the knuckles would work anatomy-wise. Shading the hair was also difficult here, since I had to make sure I was following hair strands when making selections to shade them or lighten them, while not like usually relying too much on the line art. What could help here is having a sketch overlaid to follow as guide where hair strands can be. I enjoyed adding the small particles in the end. I would want to implement something similar to this in my own art as well. The eye shading is also something I want to be inspired by, and how Kai draws hands. I still have a lot to learn there. When I look at my drawing along with Kai's illustrations, 1. The hair shading could probably be more detailed. 2. The hands look a bit too blocky. And 3. The backs and clothes I drew also could use some more detail to convey the different materials. Now moving on to the 5th artist, Nasa 14Bear. I call them Nasa Bear. This artist draws mostly anime boys with cute outfits. Their art is very bright and often includes elements like teddy bears, patches and bandages. I love the monochromatic, simpler color schemes and bright, cute aesthetic of this art, as well as the outfit designs. In Nasa's art, the silhouette lines are often a lot thicker than the inner lines. They can also be a bit sketchy and are colored slightly darker than the flat color around them. Colored lines enhance the soft look here. The necks tend to be a bit thicker, while for the faces, the eyes and features are placed pretty low on the face. Like this, the characters look cute but also more masculine. Many of the characters Nasa Bear draws also have a mole below the eye. An almond-like shape is used to draw the eyes, and the iris has a rather blocky shape, similar to how Kai outlined the iris as well. The shading is pretty simple, made up of 2 to 3 colors, and a small highlight is placed at the top of the iris. The hair is made up of a bigger shape with some smaller strands in it and has a fluffy look through flowy lines. Most of the time, Nasa Bear uses white with a analogous or monochromatic color scheme, focusing on one color for each illustration. The shading is kept simple through outline cell shading with a slightly more saturated shadow border. As I mentioned in the beginning, the many added accessoires like plasters make the art stand out, and the backgrounds often are made up of simple patterns and graphic elements. A white outline is also used around some elements to separate them from each other. While I was drawing this, I had a difficult time with the head angle I wanted to use for my pose. I wanted the shoulder and eyes to have different alignments, but was unsure about what looked natural here. I also was unsure about the anatomy of the elbow on the front and looked up some references for it. When it comes to drawing artist style though, I once again was not happy with my line work and getting it to look like Nasa Bear's does. I also was unsure about where I wanted to add white outlines. Some of the art also has a theme to it, like this underwater one or umbrella one, which I find very creative. Being inspired by themes for my illustrations is also something I want to look into for my own art. Then the colors are really nice to me. I like that they are rather minimalistic and want to use more analogous or monochromatic colors as well. For one, the lines are what I would say looks different from Nasa Bear's art. They are more clean and stiff. And 2, the hair volume could also be bigger. And 3, the eyes, especially the iris, look more flat and thin to me. And now we're moving on to the 6th artist, Rud Copper, who I refer to as Keki. This artist draws anime boys once again, this time with more of a modern aesthetic using muted colors. The way they render clothes and hands as well as the accessoires or animals they add into their illustrations especially stand out to me. Rud Copper draws using dark brown, almost black lines with a lot of varying line thickness. Some lines are also painted over. The face outline is the clearest one most of the time. The proportions are rather realistic, especially for the hands. A rounded shape is used to draw the faces with a pointy but also rounded chin. A highlight or shadow is placed on the nose. Keki draws rather rectangular eye shapes. The iris has a rather thick outline and rather simple shading with just a shadow under the eyelash. The eye highlight is placed on the lower part of the iris. Flowy shapes with a lot of zigzag ends make up the hair, and it is darkest at the hair growth spot mostly. Hair strands are separated through varying brightness of around the same color. This is also similar for the shading in general. Since this artist uses rather muted, desaturated colors, the art has not as much hue variation as some of the other artists in this video. Most of the colors in their art include black, gray and white. And the shading is painterly made up of rough blended shapes. Some illustrations of this artist include elements like a phone, a camera or cats, which are rendered really nicely to me. The reflections on the devices and the fur and eyes of the cats look very believable and realistic. The characters also wear some accessoires and the backgrounds can be either painted in, textured or simply one color. Similar to drawing my OC in Kai style before, I had a difficult time with rendering the hand. I also was unsure about the left arm's anatomy at first. The hair shading took a long time when drawing this. I added this colored light from the side, for which the color was very close to the color of the blonde hair strands of my character. The hands, as well as some of the painterly shading and rendering, are what I would want to take inspiration from for this artist. What to me turned out differently from the artist would be that, for one, the clothes in my illustration look a bit flat. 2, similar to the hand shading, the fingers are also a bit thin. Finally, my lines could have more variation, and once again they could look more flowy and less stiff. The 7th style I drew my OC in was in Hanacue style. Since this video already is pretty long, I won't mention the notes I made about hairstyle, but I uploaded a video where I talked even more in depth about drawing in hairstyle last week, so in case you haven't seen that video yet, you can check it out right after this one. Now I'll share my key takeaways from doing this project. Let's start with what I noticed I want to change in my own art. As you might have noticed, what I noticed turned out differently from the artists most of the time was my line art. I want to look into more different brushes, playing around with the pen pressure settings and doing some line art studies for this. Making sure the hair has enough volume is also something I want to pay attention to. Then I want to add more detail into my rendering while also making sure I use brush strokes efficiently. And here is a quick recap of what I want to be inspired from each artist specifically. I don't want to copy these elements, but use them as reference to come up with my own way of drawing different elements in my art. For Moomin, the backgrounds and atmosphere is what I would want to be inspired by. I love the dreamy aesthetic here. For Jinny, the content, what and who is portrayed. For Misa, adding cute stickers, the hair shading, as well as having a clearer aesthetic. I love the soft and cute look of her art. For Kai, the eyes, the hands proportions, as well as adding small particles. For Nasaber, the color palettes mostly. I like the monochromatic look and bright cute aesthetic. For Kiki, the hands as well as the rendering. And finally for Hana, the eyes, hair, face proportions, colors, and adding small sparkles. With all these notes, I would say I achieved my goal of determining changes I want to make in my own art and to gain some clarity. I hope you could also get inspired by seeing how these artists draw. Leave a comment with what stands out to you about the artists or other artists you have as inspirations. Also, are you interested in seeing more art style related videos like these? If yes, let me know, because I have a few project ideas related to art styles I would like to work on in the future. Thanks for watching and bye.